Today I'm going to show you guys how to write section 5 of your paper, so you're getting closer to the end. You made it through the hard part, which is section 4. Section 5 of your paper, you can see the due date on the screen here. This has to do with Pangaea, the assembly of Pangaea, the rifting of Pangaea, the formation of the Atlantic Ocean, and the Connecticut River Rift Valley where we were on the cave trip. So first thing, as always, what you want to make sure you do is open up the guide for writing in section 5 of your paper. You'll see I've divided it kind of into two sections here. So think of the first half of section 5, or the first part of section 5 is discussing the formation of Pangaea, with the focusing on the collision of Africa and Proto-North America. So we're not too concerned with the other continents at this point. We're just trying to stay focused on the geology of New York and Massachusetts, Proto-North America, Africa at this time. The evidence for the orogeny, so think of what mountain range would have formed as a result of this. You can look back in your reading or in your outline. And then the erosion of the mountains, and also discussing at some point in here what happened to the Iapetus Ocean. The second half is more going to focus on the rifting of Pangaea and the Connecticut River Valley. So visually what that'll look like, if you think of your section 5, the first part of your section 5, if you look at the pictures here in your block diagrams, we're focusing on Pangaea assembling. So here's PNA. And then you have Proto-Africa, which is here. This is your collision. And you can see the Appalachian Mountains, which formed as a result. So this was the Alleghenian orogeny. So this is where we are and where we're thinking about, again, just focus on this part of Pangaea's assembly. From a side view, you can see here Proto-North America and Proto-Africa colliding, and then the result is the present-day Appalachian Mountains. In your block diagrams, you can see here, think about this, here's the Iapetus Ocean. So we have to also think about, as Pangaea assembles, what's going to happen to the Iapetus Ocean. Finally, at this point in our story, if you go from that diagram to this diagram and then to the next one, you can kind of figure that out. So you want to focus on kind of the assembly of Pangaea with the mountain building, what happens to the Iapetus Ocean. The Appalachian Mountains today are still visible. This picture, bottom picture here, shows they extend from essentially Maine all the way down the coast past kind of New York and Massachusetts. And it's the formation of these mountains that actually lifts up the basin, and that's why we no longer would have a tropical sea in New York in any of these diagrams here. As you can see how the sea disappears. That's because of this major collision lifting up the basin in New York. So that's the first part of section 5. The second part of section 5 is you're going to talk about the rifting. So the rifting begins between North America and Africa, right along here. And here's the rift, the successful rift between the two continents. At this point, what you want to start to mention in your paper is where North America is moving away from in terms of the location of the Earth. So most of the paper you guys have talked about PNA being near the equator. Once this rifting begins, it starts to move towards its present-day location, not quite there yet. Side view, you can see here, here's Proto-North America, here's Africa, here's the successful rift that opens up, forming the Atlantic Ocean. And to put it in terms of how long this takes, you know, this is what the rift would have started as. So you start with these rifts in the crust, the magma's coming up to make volcanoes, your pillow lavas, your pillow basalts. The successful rift would have looked something like this here. So here's North America, here's Africa, and that basin that forms in between the two continents from the successful rift then fills with seawater, forming your Proto-Atlantic Ocean. And as the continents moved farther apart, you know, we then called it the Atlantic Ocean. In the block diagrams, you can see that in the third page of blocks towards the end. So we're pretty much done with the block diagrams after this section here. So here's the rifting beginning. You can see where the rift, here's the successful rift of Pangaea. Here are those failed rift valleys. So that's what we need to focus on, is one of these failed rift valleys was the Connecticut River Valley. And that's where we saw evidence. So you can think of the successful rift as these pictures over here. The failed rift might have looked something like you see at the top here. So there would have been volcanoes, mountains on either side. So here's if you want to think of the failed Rift Valley that would have formed, along this point here, the Connecticut River, Connecticut River Valley. There would have been lakes, swamps. These rift valleys were probably, 40 to 60 miles wide, so they weren't small by any means, with large mountains on either side, volcanoes with lava pouring down those rifts into the valley floor. So that's probably what the Rift Valley, the failed Rift Valley, looked like. So you're going to have to now connect some evidence from your trip and from your readings, the Longmeadow Formation, the pillow lavas, to support the evidence that this was a failed Rift Valley. The other piece you need to think about is the dinosaurs here and what the conditions were like in the Rift Valley. So I'll be particularly looking for that. This picture I found is particularly helpful. I've put this in the trip diagram section, so if you want to get a closer look, this is what the Connecticut River Valley probably would have looked like at the time that this failed rift formed. So you can see you have a couple of key features here that we saw evidence for. So there's the lakes and ponds and swamps. We saw evidence of the vegetation. When we were down by the banks of the Connecticut River, we saw evidence of the dinosaurs. And if you look closely here, you can actually see the ripples that they put in this illustration that would have been formed by the lake water moving across the mud. And, these dinosaurs were probably stepping in that mud here. Here's a large dinosaur, a medium dinosaur, a small dinosaur. So we have evidence kind of a muddy, kind of swampy environment based on what we saw with dinosaurs and living organisms. With any swamp, you would have had fallen trees and branches and stuff, which you can see right here. We saw evidence for that too. And then the layered rock you guys were on, that's the Longmeadow Formation. That's what this silt and mud that you see it in this picture would have become here. So you want to try to piece together kind of what the conditions were like in the Rift Valley. Incorporate your dinosaurs, incorporate your fossil wood, your Longmeadow Formation, and then remember these mountains you see in the horizon here would have had the volcanoes from the rifting. So that's where the pillow lavas would have come down into the Rift Valley to form the Holyoke basalts as the lava erupted from various volcanoes in the rift here. So this is all at the time of Pangea, kind of North America. It's still at the equator, it's still warm enough for dinosaurs to dominate. So just make sure you back up your section about the Connecticut River Valley with the evidence you saw on the trip. That's going to be very important when you write section 5. So I hope this helps.